Hello. Kia ora, everybody. Or more formally, kina toto, kina toto, kina toto couture. Greetings here from Aotearoa. Hi, Amy. Lovely to see you there. From Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud here in New Zealand. Now, I know with the time differences, most of the people are coming from the US for this. Bit tough on the UK crowd. So it's a small party of Australia and New Zealand and our lovely friends from over in the States. But we're recording this, so it'll be able to be viewed by all my readers and colleagues over in the UK afterwards. So, yes, kia ora, Amy. I hope you're well. I hope you're doing well with all the fires there and settling down in LA. Best wishes to you. So I've got some questions already lined up. Some of you have sent in some questions early today. I'm not talking about Jane and the Dragon. I hope that was clear in our advertising of this. So the second book in my Alice in Wonderland series called the Taking Wonderland. So Truth and Transformation. Here I'm doing the proper author thing, holding it up, angling it so it catches the light, just like a toothpaste advert, product placement. So this is out now. This has just gone live, so you can buy it now. So thank you to all of those of you who have pre-ordered. Now, I'm sure those of you, all the writers among you, you know how this works. It's quite important that as many of you send in reviews, nice reviews, early to help with the algorithms. Hello there, Southern Crystal. I can't see the end of your name, maybe Crystal. Hello. So I'll start with the questions that have come in early, which is, as I say, about truth and transformation, and the first book in the series, which is The Secret of Safe Passage. There they both are. So the first question that came in, it was from, I've pinned them up on the wall about behind the computer, so I can read them without changing my glasses. From Andrea, I've not read it yet. Andrea, I've not read it yet because I love the originals. Will it spoil them? Well, I sincerely hope not. I love the originals. That's why I've written these books. I am absolutely passionate about the Alice in Wonderland books. And it doesn't deal with the stories of the original in the sense that we're not in that world the way it's written in that book. In fact, it goes to one of the other questions, which is somebody has said, I can't remember the Alice books very well. Do I need to read them first? The answer is no, you don't. I'm assuming that perhaps the vast majority of people who discover my book, who love fantasy, won't have read the Alice in Wonderland books. They might be familiar with film adaptations and so forth, but you absolutely don't need to know anything about Alice in Wonderland. In fact, the novels kind of assume that you don't, because in the novels, the protagonist, Ali, knows nothing about them either. She's in a sense, she's been guided away from having anything to do with them for reasons which become clear in the books later. So you don't need to know anything about the Alice in Wonderland books, and it won't spoil them. I know this for a fact because having read my books, some readers have gone back and read the originals for the first time, which is a lovely thing. I'm really glad it's turning some new readers onto the original Alice in Wonderland books. So thank you for those two questions. Oh, hi, Savannah. It's your business page for some reason. All right. I'm sorry for calling you Southern Crystal. That's Savannah. And thank you to Positive Vibe. Huge fan, much success on my new creation. Thank you. And Amy, yes, they stand alone. Thank you. I appreciate that. I hope they do. This trilogy, it's a fantasy trilogy, and it's It's adult fantasy, but it's accessible to YA if you're a good reader. But it's a bit like, I don't know, I'm not trying to compare myself to Lord of the Rings, but by comparison, you can read all those books and still enjoy them as separate books. They have a complete story amongst themselves, and then the bigger arc carries on. So the first book ends with a completion of a particular aspect of the story, and then book 2 carries on, and again has a completion. Now, none of you will have read book 2 yet, unless you're very fast readers, because it just went live 2 hours ago. So you can get it right now on Amazon, but I'm not expecting any of you to be that fast reading it to be able to ask me any questions about book 2. So next question. It's from Olivia. I don't understand how you put codes into the original books. Have you cheated? Okay, so those of you who don't understand the context of this question, this stems from perhaps one of my posts where I explain what the book is about. The premise of the Taking Wonderland series is that the original books aren't storybooks. They're actually like a Da Vinci Code. They were written by the original Alice as a young woman who has been going backwards and forwards into Wonderland and is trying to keep Wonderland safe from some pretty ugly group of people who are trying to take Wonderland, which is essentially what the title of the series is about. There's a group who are taking Wonderland. And the original Alice was trying to keep Wonderland safe. And the protagonist in these stories is a 15-year-old girl, Ali, who is a lover of science, who doesn't believe in any fantasy. She's a born skeptic of everything. And for a whole series of events, she ends up at the place where her great aunt Alice used to live and went missing. And she finds copies of the Alice in Wonderland books, all annotated in her great aunt's handwriting. Also, she believes. No spoilers. And what happens is she comes to realize that the books are actually disguised as stories, but they are full of codes and riddles that unlock the secrets for how to get in to the other world, this particular part of the multiverse, which the original Alice called Wonderland, because it was a very Victorian term to try and describe something that extraordinary. The new Ali doesn't believe it's happening to her. She's a skeptic, she's a scientist, but she comes to accept that she has inadvertently slipped through the portal into the other universe. But when she comes back, she's violently ill, and so ill that she repeats it often enough, going backwards and forward. It's going to kill her. And she meets characters over in Wonderland who tell her it's going to kill you. And so what she's trying to learn, and the title of the first novel is The Secret of Safe Passage, because that's what the first book is all about. Ali is kind of totally intrigued. She thinks of herself a bit like a science reporter. She's stumbled into something that is so huge, but she realizes it's also being kept a secret. Doesn't understand why it's being kept a secret, but starts to realize that there are issues that she needs to grapple with, and she wants to unlock this secret of safe passage because she's desperate to go back. And there are a whole variety of reasons in the novel to do with her family and what's happening to her father and things like that. That means she's trapped in a difficult situation. So that's the adventure. But the question, that was a big ramble, wasn't it? The question was, how have I put codes into the original books without, have I cheated? No, I haven't. So when Ali reads a passage in the original book and unlocks a code that tells us something about the multiverse, it's a real solution. But of course, it was never intended when the book was written, whenever 150 years ago. I've had to turn them into riddles that are buried in there. I don't want to do any spoilers, so I won't explain any of them except one. And I use this as an example because it's very easy to get. Clearly, it was never intended in the original book. It's just delightful for me as a little piece of gold that I've managed to dig out of the books. That one of the main characters, the Hatter is an anagram, if you mix the letters up, of threat, T-H-R-E-A-T, just the letters of Hatter scrambled up. And anagrams is a great device for burying codes and riddles, particularly if they're very long anagrams, of entire passages. So no, I haven't cheated. That was a big ramble, wasn't it? We'll have to cut that down when we put the answers online. No, I haven't cheated. Everything that she describes and discovers in the real book are things which are in there. For instance, there's a passage that, if you know when she goes into the forest and she meets the deer, and she starts to realize she's losing her memory. And how is she losing her memory? What is happening? And losing her memory actually turns out to be a very real thing that happens across in Wonderland. And she has to find out how to stop losing her memory. So I've taken every aspect of the books and turned it into a kind of scientific, rationale reality with codes and riddles buried in it, which is why it's taken 25 to 30 years to write. The idea came to me a long time ago, but being able to build these riddles and codes from the existing books is what's taken the time. So Zed, what is the book about? Well, that's what it's about. Thank you for your question. Thank you, Amy. Yes, it's a Da Vinci Code rabbit hole. And thank you for saying that. I hugely appreciate your review there. So yes, Zed, it is a mystery thriller that's part fantasy, but it's not fantasy with dragons and magic and wizards. It's kind of more science fiction fantasy, where I've tried to take the logic of a multiverse and what's happening and what we see happening in Wonderland and try and find scientific rationales for it, because that's what Ali's mindset is. She's a young scientist who does not believe any nonsense at all. So, hello, Bob, Mr. Miller, Bob. Lovely to see you here. So, your question: what motivated me to write the Taking Wonderland books, and when do I expect to finish book 3? So, two questions. The second one very loaded. Respectfully, I know. Thank you. I think it's because I explored the idea because it came to me. Right, the idea came to me a long, long time ago. I felt sure I was. I don't want to go down this particular rabbit hole, but I was a very sickly child. So I had asthma and eczema, and asthma it was not treated back in the 50s when I was a child. There were no inhalers and what have you. So when you had an asthma attack, you were either in hospital or you were confined to bed. And I was brought up in London in the smog, where a lot of young kids like me died because of the air, the toxicity of the air. So I was kept in bed and wrapped up in curtains drawn against the light and the smoke and what have you. So I had to entertain myself a lot. And one of the ways I entertained myself was I didn't have very many books. My mum was great. She tried to bring them, from the library and so forth. You must remember this only a few years after the war had ended, and London hadn't really been rebuilt then. It was the rebuilding was starting in the early 50s. And so books were at a premium. So you borrowed books and you went to the library and you scrounged and you got them off your relatives. And when I got the Alice in Wonderland books, I read it probably about 30 times. And I started writing my own extended versions of the story from as young as 6, 7 years old, and illustrating all the characters, and the characters that weren't illustrated in the book, I'd illustrate the other characters. So it started as an obsession to extend the stories because I wanted to live in and inhabit that world for longer. So I don't think that's what motivated me to write it, Bob. Truthfully, that's what started the interest in it. What motivated me years later was actually the irritation in some of the adaptations of Wonderland in recent years in the movies that, in my view, have taken not the strongest elements of the stories and tried to force a narrative on them, which is a 3-act structure narrative. So I wanted to explore the whole Wonderland universe in a more sophisticated way, I guess, I wanted other people to fall in love with the world as much as I did and view it through the lens of these new books, through the lens of the protagonist, and hopefully fall in love with the books themselves. What was your process in creating Ali? You did such a great job putting into the mind of a 15-year-old. So relatable and emotional. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, so Ali, I think it's the truth for writers is that they have to pull from everything they know. I wanted a character who was angry. I needed her to be angry because that was the character I wanted in there. I wanted to be the absolute antithesis of the original Alice, because the original Alice I found a very difficult child to enjoy. I love the books. I love the craziness of the stories. I love the nonsense, and I love the sheer inventiveness of the Alice in Wonderland books. But Alice herself, what a creature of her time. You know, I mean, books were only read by middle class and upward children, really, that could afford them. Children had to speak when they're spoken to. They had nannies and all the rest of it, if they were in that particular, class structure milieu where these books were being read to them. And so Alice in the original books is a construct of the perfect little girl who is very well behaved, doesn't dig too deeply, asks a lot of really quite trivial questions, and is unbelievably frustrating. And I did not want her as a young friend when I was a young boy. She was the opposite of everything I wanted in a young colleague. So that was the start of it. And then my daughter Terry, I started writing this long before I had my daughter. But the young girls of my friends when I was growing up and was a teenager and so forth, I loved the girls who did not accept anything about any status quo, about anything. My favorite, the girl I fell madly in love with in school, I won't mention her name because I'm sure she's still alive somewhere. It would be embarrassing for her. But she was an incredible intellect, and she never took any nonsense from our teachers. And she would give our teachers an incredibly hard time. In fact, I think she was intellectually their equal. And I admired her enormously. So there's definitely a lot of her in there. But I also needed to be potentially the original title for the series was Finding Alice, because I had this idea that there's the story of finding the original Alice, but then Alice, the main character, finding herself. So it's a kind of a voyage of discovery for someone to fall in love with themselves after being out of love with themselves, or never even loving themselves originally. So Ali is, and I couldn't use that title, by the way, because it already exists as a Finding Alice, which is a quite traumatic, a real life detective story around a lost girl. So I didn't want to raise that ghost. So the Ali character needed to be quite a difficult character, because I wanted to be very abrupt. She's expelled out of school when we first meet her. She's very, very challenging. And I was hoping readers would get past the first few chapters and be able to sympathize with her. So thank you very much for your comment there, and how you were able to identify with her. I certainly identified with her. It is a lot of how I felt when I was that age. But it's also the great thing about a writer, all right? You're sort of fantasizing. If I was 15 again, and I know what I know, how would I do things differently? How would I stand up for myself? How would I ask the difficult questions? How would I not put up with the bullshit from particular types of adult? So there's a lot of that in the book. The Ali character is perhaps modeling the behavior I wish I'd had when I was 15. Thank you, Zain, about your comment here, and thank you about the Jane and the Dragon, which you watched when you were younger. It is interesting, isn't it, that I've only written really my books are about young women. I don't know why. I honestly don't know why. I think it's each like the Jane and the Dragon. It had to be a young girl, because the whole point of the Jane and the Dragon book, when I wrote it, was I was absolutely pissed off with all the role models for girls in fairy stories, and I wanted to write a modern fable where the girl doesn't wait for Prince Charming to come along, but she she's the master of her own destiny. But then, of course, when it came to writing this book, I did toy with the idea of it being, a nephew of the late great Alice, but that felt wrong. I didn't want to. I wanted to stay with the feminine point of view, but there's actually also a reason in there, which is scientific, which is to do with the our matriarchal genetic line. And those of you who are in that understand science and understand how we're able to, follow our DNA back through the women, not the men. The men are a sideline of history as far as genetics are concerned. It's all about the women. It's all about the women's DNA, which, why not? It's good. Thank you. I appreciate that for saying that. I do hope. We have so many good stories with male leads, don't we? And this story was right for it being a young woman. So, what is important for us to know going into book 2 are things we should pay particular attention to. Well, it starts where book 1 finishes. I don't do a kind of like a one-pager on what went before. So if you've forgotten book 1, you might be a little bit lost. But my hope is that, so add the characters, the aunt and uncle, who are going back when they realize she's not in the car. They're going back. They are recounting some of the adventure, but in a forward-moving narrative, so that it's not slowing down the pace. And then Ali and the person she's with in Wonderland, I won't say who because that's a spoiler to people who haven't read book 1. They are talking about aspects of book 1. So you get a kind of reprise as the narrative is moving forward, rather than, I really don't like going, hey, this is what happened in book 1, because it's really hard to paraphrase something and make it sound interesting. Right? Sometimes when I paraphrase my own books, I think, not much has really happened. So I don't like doing that, because I think the delight is in the detail, not in the story points. Anyway, I'm sorry these questions are so long-winded. Lovely questions, though. Thank you all very much indeed. So let me go back. I've got more here that were sent in. Let me go back and make sure I'm not missing anybody. Advice for fellow writers. Yes, positive vibe. Thank you. It really depends. So it depends why you're writing. Okay, that's the first thing. So the advice is different. There are 3 or 4 different kinds of writers. There are writers who have a story and they want to tell it. Then they're learning their craft in order that they can tell that story. That's one kind of writer. There are writers who want to be writers because it looks like a really fun profession. Oh, I'm a writer, or I'm a photographer, or I'm a, an entrepreneur, blogger, or what, I don't know. It's like being a child and wanting to be a fireman. Now, I was that, so I'm not demeaning it. I was that. When I was very young, my heroes were writers. My heroes were Dickens and A. Milne and John Wyndham and people. When I was 9, I think I was 9 years old, I won a prize at school. I won the Wind in the Willows as a writing prize because we had to write an essay. Composition, they used to call them back then, in the 50s. I had to write a composition on what I wanted to be when I grow up. And my mum kept it. I've got that, apparently. I have got it. It's called, and I said I wanted to be a writer. No, I wanted to be an author illustrator, like A. Milne and Arthur Rackham. I with a whole list of all my heroes as a 9-year-old. So I wanted to be a writer. I didn't have any stories to tell. I just wanted to be a writer. I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So it actually motivated me to learn the craft. My English literature teacher realized that I wanted to learn the craft, and he pushed me by giving me more and more difficult books to read. And that is my biggest piece of advice to anybody who says, how do you help other writers? Read lots of books that are in the voice of the craft that you admire. So if you're writing romance, read Bronte, read Austen, read the great romantics, and just absorb the craft of how they put it. And you don't have to study it. If you read a lot, you actually absorb it, and you can almost hear their voice, hear the rhythm of their structures and how they approach a sentence. It becomes sort of second nature to you, to the point where you think, am I channeling them? Am I channeling Dickens at the moment or whatever? So, and I think it's just simply the way our brain works, right? We understand language through using language. So you can either understand language by using language poorly, or you can understand language by soaking up really good craft. So the more poor writing you read, the more your brain will be wired to think like that. There's I won't go on too much, but there's a lot of work on scrolling and Google reading and its impact on writing styles and reading abilities and retention and so forth and so on. But anyway, read lots of good books. Honestly, that's the best thing. That's absolutely the best thing you can do. The other thing is, be sure you're writing about something you're passionate about. Because it's very hard to write. It's very hard to sit down or to walk with a tape recorder or tape recorder. God, I sound old, but into your recorder in your phone. If you're not passionate about what you're talking about, and so have a story you want to tell, and make sure it's a story you actually want to tell, and absorb. You can read endlessly. There are great things online. Stephen King and people like that, really, really good at breaking down and defining a lot of the aspects of their own craft. Fantastic stuff on YouTube and in books. But my advice is read the greats and let it imprint itself to you, and then try to talk to them like them when you're alone on the beach. Try to talk like Jane Austen, or try to talk like Dickens, and you'll find that it will feel like you're like doing a comedy routine at first, but you'll hear it come. You'll hear the voice begin to be real inside of you. That's honestly the best advice I can give you. And then you'll know what aspects of other people's voices become your own because they become natural to you. Anyway, better move on. That's a lot on writers, and some of you out there are writers. Next question. Is it complicated? And it's complicated. So this is from Sierra. It's complicated. I mean, in a good way. Oh, thank you. Did you have the whole plot worked out for all the books? I had the adventure worked out. I knew her goals. I knew her redemption story. I knew what she needed to achieve for herself as a person. I knew all the main riddles that I'd set myself to place in the book and resolve that were plot points for her. And no spoiler, one of the biggest ones is the riddle of the how is a raven like a writing desk? That's actually voiced as, what is the difference between a raven and a writing desk? And there is no answer to that riddle. It was never intended to have an answer when he made it up. It was a piece of nonsense. But I've come up with my answer to it, and it actually is one of the center points of the whole story. And she solves it at the end of book 2. Now, I knew that plot point. I knew that at the end of book 2, she was going to solve this plot point, and it unleashes a whole escalation in her problems, because it's been something the original Alice was trying to keep secret, absolutely secret, for reasons which no longer apply, and which is why Ali can literally know. So yes, I know it's complicated. Somebody asked me, and I said on one of them, you don't have to be an accomplished reader to read it, but you have to enjoy reading a proper book. So next question. In fact, I think, oh my goodness, this might be the last question. So I've got time for a couple more. Will Ali solve any more of the cold cases like her aunt did? Great aunt did. Yes. So those of you who haven't read the first book yet, one of the storylines, one of the issues is that the original Alice realized that the people trapped in Wonderland, because they can't get out because they don't have the secret safe passage, were real people, right? And then they've gone through, and they forget who they are. After a while, over in Wonderland, you forget yourself. And that piece, it's in the original books, and that's what happens when she goes into the forest with the fawn. I think it's in Through the Looking Glass. So I built on that, and it does happen, and you have to use mental protocols to remember things. But all the characters we meet over there, they don't know who they were before they went to Wonderland. The original Alice is trying to find out who they were. So she has the ability to go back and forth, which we discover in book 1. And she's trying to find their original histories, and they're desperate for them. And so they're like cold cases, because these are missing people. back in Victorian times, cold cases mostly you read about in the local newspaper or what have you, or gossip, the gossip in the local pub, someone's gone missing. So she was trying to find the circumstance of people going missing and take those stories back. And if people heard the story and if it was them, then the memories would return, with all sorts of issues that come with that, with realizing you've lost your family and everything, and it's traumatic to remember everything. So it's quite a lot of trauma in the book. But the Ally, the modern protagonist, yes, she has to find out the true histories of some of these people as essential points in the second book for the survival of Wonderland. So yes, she does. She becomes a bit of a detective. So the books take place between Wonderland and the contemporary world, but there's a time lag difference. So time moves a lot more slowly in Wonderland, incredibly slowly, and that's one of the things she has to figure out. And how slowly it moves, she discovers, is encoded in a riddle in the books. Well, I've made it so that it is, and then that actually affects how Wonderland is being used by people and so forth. So it has a science fiction element in the sense you've got two universes moving at different speeds. So if you hop from one universe into the other and you stay there for a little time, a lot of time has transpired in the other one, but vice versa, you can do a great deal in the other one, and then not much time has passed, but you've aged when you come back in. So I play with a lot of that, as they do in science fiction stories. In fact, it's key to one of the main plot points of the book. Time for one more. This is a writing thing. So apologies to those of you who aren't writers. Rebecca, you're asking if I could expand on one of my posts when I said, try not to keep saying said as much. So your question was, you talked about not saying said as much. I did a word search, as you suggested, and I use it all the time. Help! Exclamation mark. It's a literary device, Rebecca. It's a literary device. I find it really, really irritating when people say he said, she said. Peter said this, and blah 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 said that, and somebody asked that, and John replied, and Peter said, and Philippa replied, and somebody gasped. Just change it. Let's put a gasped in there, and so it actually becomes a meter that I find irritating. And one of the mechanisms for avoiding that I use in my writing style, which I guess is part of my voice, is I put an action in there. So in other words, you actually say what the character, you don't have to say who's saying, you don't have to go said Peter. If you know Peter's talking, because you refer to their action. So you can what do you mean? Peter looked up from his desk and glared at her. You don't have to say said Peter, right? Instead of saying said Peter, you've added context to why he's saying it. And if you do that occasionally, you can even split the dialogue then. What do you mean? Peter sat up, stood up, and punched the air. How dare you speak to me like that? So you don't have to say said Peter, and you don't have to put as much anger into the dialogue, because you could describe his state in the action that separates the two bits of dialogue. So one of the things I suggest to writers is do a word search. If you come up with some word you suddenly realize you're using a lot, for me it's very. I find I use very a lot. I do a word search after a couple of chapters for very and go ping, 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 ping. I say, okay, so you might as well do it yourself as pay an editor to do it, right? So that's what I mean by that. But I hope that makes sense. Okay, hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, I'll try and do another more complete blog about it. Anyway, thank you all very much indeed for coming on here today. A quick final word. So this is out right now. And this has been out for, I think it's nearly 2 years now, which goes to your final question, Bob. I've left it to the end, is when will I finish book 3? Is that because you're going to wait until I finish book 3 before you buy book 2? Because I don't blame you. I think a lot of people use that strategy with trilogies, don't they? They're not going to start them. I'm the same with the Netflix or something. I want to binge watch it. I'm not going to watch it one episode a week. So I fully respect anybody who's going to wait until book 3 is out. But I think it'll be late next year. It's a faster write than this one, simply because my personal circumstances mean that I've got a little bit more time. But it's a faster write because in writing book 2, I had to resolve masses of the plot threads of book 3. So it's all the materials laid out for book 3. I just have to put in 3 or 4 hours a day. If I put in 3 or 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, I should be right. Sounds like a Herculean effort right now. I might just go and have a siesta. Thank you all very much indeed. It's been lovely talking to you, and I do appreciate it. Those of you missed a bit of it and had to leave early or came in late, we're going to try and put it all up on YouTube and other places. YouTube. Thank you all again, and I look forward to doing another one very soon. Book launch tomorrow. I'll try and put a lot of that up on the various social media sites. So very excited about that, and a little bit nervous. Always nervous. I think all writers prefer to write than. I don't mind this. Feels kind of intimate. So thank you for making it not very scary. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.